Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the podcast. I've got an incredible guest that I had the pleasure of listening to live, I think 3 or 4 years ago now at an event, and blew me away. Just her depth, her charisma, her care. I'll introduce our incredible guest. Dr. Vanessa Lapointe is a mum, registered psychologist, parenting educator, best-selling author, and I'm actually currently reading one of her books at the moment, a regular invited media guest, founder and director of the Wishing Star Lapointe Development Clinic. That's a mouthful. She has been supporting families and children for almost 20 years, has had experience in community, mental health, and the schooling system. Her passion is in walking alongside parents, teachers, and care providers and other big people to really see the world through the child's eyes. She really believes that if we can do this, we are beautifully positioned to grow up our children in the best way possible. Vanessa, I'm truly grateful to have you on today. I've been looking forward to this for a long time. How are you today?
I am doing fantastic, and it is awesome to be on with you.
Like Will mentioned I was talking before the podcast. I met you down with Kerwin Ray, and just your substance and the way it ties into as adults, we're just the grown up version of our younger selves, and those pains and traumas and wounds that we go through, if unhealed, still show up to today. So I guess before we dive into that, because I got a lot of questions I'd love to ask you today, could you give us a little bit more about your story? I know I just introduced you and a couple of your achievements, but I'd love to know, how did you get into doing what it is that you do today?
Yeah, so when I was growing up, I was always very drawn to working with children and their energy and how much fun they are. And so I grew up working at summer camps with kids. And also, I was a competitive figure skater. And so to earn extra money on the side, I would coach little kids and teach them how to skate. And then I became a psychologist and decided to focus on children. Learned all of the things that I could learn, graduated and became a mother, and realized very quickly, I know nothing. And in fact, much of what I had been taught and much of the training that I had received felt very to me. I didn't like how it sat with me. I didn't like the feeling of doing those kinds of things to my children in terms of discipline and other kinds of things. And so I began studying anew, and it took me down a years long rabbit hole of really understanding relationship-based care. And so life went on as it does. And about 6 years ago, my very troubled marriage that had been struggling for quite a long time blew up in a huge and spectacular way. And I found myself facing another very significant series of challenges as a mother, parent, trying to really bring my family through this time period in a way that would find myself growing, and also that would allow my children to come through not just having survived that, but having thrived in the face of it. And so another big rabbit hole began. And that truly, I had seen psychologists myself before then, but that truly began my own deep dive into my personal growth work.
I love it. And I was listening to your story in the book that I'm reading, and even the part that I was just watching some of your content before I jumped on this video with you. I'd love to know if we could just dive straight into some of the deeper stuff and go straight into it. I love the point of, you mentioned, when we're triggered, we regress back to our younger self. I guess I'd love to know from you, what do you mean by that? So say you're in a relationship, and I find the more intimate relationship you have with someone, whether it is your intimate partner or just the closer the friendship, the more you're going to get triggered, the more they're going to bring up those wounds, the more they're going to bring that stuff to the surface. But if you could just explain a little bit around how you regress back to when that wound probably occurred, and even a little bit further, how does one then work through it so it doesn't continue to get triggered and triggered and triggered and triggered in their life? I'd love to hear your answer to that.
Yeah. So when we are babies, we are born into the world, and we come into our first formative relationships, those with our parents. Those relationships create a template or a blueprint that literally seeps into our body and up into the neurological architecture of our brains and informs how our hearts grow and the stories that become embedded in our very souls. And all of that follows us forward into adulthood. So when we are children, the environment around us creates our mind. Then we grow up and become adults, at least in form, and our mind then creates the environment around us. And so from those formative relationships when we were little, maybe we learned, I need to perform in order to be loved. I need to perform in order to receive love. And then we grow up and we become grown-ups, and we enter into an intimate relationship, which mimics in terms of intensity of feeling and emotion, that very first relationship. And we feel like our partner is criticizing us for underperforming. The expression is all overreaction is an age regression. So when our partner says, oh, babe, you forgot to take the bins out. And then you're like, why is it always me? And you end up having this big domestic that you didn't do the thing that your partner thought that you were meant to do. And like, that should be a non-issue. Oh, you're right. I forgot to take the bins out. Like, it's not an anything unless we make it a something. And so the overreaction is because it takes us backwards in time to a point when we onboarded this really alarming message. Like, I have to show up and perform in order to be loved. It's not good enough that I simply exist. I have to perform in order to be loved. If I feel like I'm underperforming, I'm going to be a mess, because we are a social species and we live, we breathe attachment and connection.
That's powerful. I'd like to know, what do parents generally, if you just go big picture and we'll dive down some of the rabbit holes of them, what do most parents do wrong? What is, like, I know that's just as broad as you can get, but what's the most sort of common mistakes you see modern parents doing to, because I've had this conversation so many times, that's why I've looked forward to this conversation so much, is like, what's the formula? Because if you look at your parents right now, it's like your mum and dad, or whoever played those parental roles, the way they parented you equals the person you are today to an extent. You're obviously born with your own gifts and all that good stuff. So yeah, I guess where I'm going with that question off the back end of it is, what do most parents do wrong? And then how do we give our children the best environment to grow up in the most authentic, genuine, fullest expression of them, rather than, I guess something I experience a lot is that my parents trying to put their molds onto me, and it's kind of, you get the reverse, right? The more you push, the more you get pushed back. So I guess, what do most parents do wrong? And then how do we do the opposite? What can we do to give our children the best opportunity to become the best version of them? That was kind of a big question, but I'd love to hear how you go.
I think what most of us do wrong, and I'll say this with heaps of love and through no fault of your own, if you're a parent that is listening, is that we buy into the child raising pop culture of years gone by. And we have a very long tradition of raising children in what I will call a behaviorist approach. Now, a behaviorist approach is, I look at the facade of the child, I see how the child is presenting, I see how the child is behaving, I see what the child is or is not doing, and then I engage in some kind of an action in order to change that behavior. So if you think about behavior, we often call it the ABCs of behavior. You have your antecedent, the thing that happened before the behavior. You have your behavior, the B, and then you have your consequence, or the thing that happens after the behavior. Behaviorists focus on the consequence. And so you smack your little brother. A behaviorist is going to put you in a timeout or take something away from you or do something that's meant to teach you a lesson. The problem is, when we focus on behavior and behavior only, we do so at the neglect of the internal workings of a child. Shefali Sabari has this beautiful quote about children. She says that they're born into the world throbbing. I love that word, throbbing with their own signature. They're meant to be their own person. They have all of this stuff going on inside of them, and it's bubbling up and bubbling out and bubbling over into the world. And sometimes that means I'm going to cuff my little brother on the head, not because I'm a bad person, and because I'm just working to figure this all out, and I really don't know how to go forward in this. A relationship-based parent, which is what I advocate for, is rather than focusing on the consequence, you're going to get in front of it and you're going to focus on the antecedent. What's happening over here? What fed into this child having this kind of eruption or this kind of explosion? And by virtue of the fact that I've started now to focus on antecedent, the shift moves from the child having to change their behavior to who is it that creates the child's environment? It's us, the grown-ups. It's us changing our behaviors in terms of how we're coming alongside this child. And when we can understand who they are, what makes them tick, how they're, maybe they're super big feelers. I have one, my youngest son is just this larger than life human. And like everything got him going as a little guy. So we would be in public and people would say hello to him. People that we knew would say hello to him and he would growl at them. Like he would bare his teeth and growl. And if I was going to be a behaviors parent, I'd be like, now, that's not how we say hi to people. And you know what your manners are and whatever. And because I was a relationship-based parent, I was like, oh yeah, that's my kid. Because he's so sensitive. Like the thought of having to speak to grown-ups that he's only loosely familiar with makes his head want to explode off his body. So of course he growls at them. And that's on them, really. So it's a shift to being antecedent focused, relationship based.
And how does one do that? So something, I guess, speaking from my personal experiences, I struggled with my one of my parents connecting with me to have that trust with me to express myself. I felt very, I guess, unsafe. You mentioned the word environment. I didn't feel like I had that environment for me growing up to have that level of connection with my parents to help do what it is that you just said. So how does a parent connect with their children? How does a parent make them build that relationship so they can go back to that? They don't just sort of snap at the end result, right? Instead of going to the C to get to the A, you can't get to the A until you've got a bit of a relationship. You can maybe discuss it, talk about it, and dig into it a little bit more. How does a parent get through that cause if the relationship with their child isn't there for whatever reason?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And I would say the answer has two components to it. The first is that in order to have a relationship with your child of the ilk that I am speaking about, you have to have a relationship with yourself that way. And so the outside world is our mirror. And I'm here to tell you, no more so than our children, who just like reflect back at you in full living color all of the parts of yourself that are as yet unhealed and still at the effect of wounding from your own childhood. Your children are here to shine light on that. And so you will not be able to give to your children relationship-based, antecedent-focused kind of care if inside you're a constant, triggered, reactive mess. So we have to grow ourselves to grow our children. We have to show up and understand as grown adults, and it's different for children, but as adults, nobody can make me feel anything. And this is a big pill to swallow. I choose every single feeling that I have. I choose it. So if I'm pissed at my kid because I think they're being a little asshole, I have chosen to be pissed. And if I'm, yelly, shouty, crabby mom or yelly, shouty, crabby wife, I have chosen to be that way because I'm a grown-up and it's on me. And so I get to figure out, where's that coming from? Why am I so unsettled? We are all the ages that we have ever been, like those Matryoshka nesting dolls. So you have like little 1-year-old in you and little 2-year-old in you and little 3-year-old in you, all the way up to little 47-year-old in you. And you will come back to those different ages depending on what the trigger was and what it is that's going on around you, and behave very much like a child. So you have to heal yourself first. The second layer to it is to come alongside your children with eyes that really see them, not eyes that are triggered and seeing your own internal wounding, but rather eyes that really see your children and be for them what is required. And so if you're watching, depends what angle you have, on the wall behind me, there's a sign that says, see it, then feel it, then be it, which is this 3-part guiding mantra that I use with all of the families that I work with. You see what it is that's going on, you feel it. So you get behind the behavior that the child is presented with, and you feel for them what is happening on the inside. And as soon as you have that heart connection, as soon as you're like, oh, you're not giving me a hard time, you're having a hard time, then you're in. Then you don't need me to script you an answer. You don't need me to tell you how to discipline. You don't need anything, because now you're in sync. You're emotionally, affectively in sync with your child, and you will arrive for them. You will be for them what it is that's needed. I was speaking with a family earlier today whose 9-year-old daughter is really struggling, and she's reactive all the time and on her younger sibling all the time and getting into trouble at school all the time. And I was checking in with them about the car ride to school this morning and how it had gone. And they had mentioned to me that in the car ride to school today, it was a lesson about how to choose appropriate friends on the playground. What? So you have this kid who's already, because school's really hard for her, already really freaked out about going to school. So we're going to get behind the crust. The crust is she acts out of school and gets in trouble. And we're going to go into her heart. Her heart is, school is a terrifying place for her to be right now. She's the bad kid. She's not good at academics. She gets in trouble on the playground. And we're about to drop her off and leave her there for 7 hours, where she's going to have to function without her big people having her back for her. And we're teaching her a lesson. That's not what we do. How do we show up and really feel and then be for her what it is that she needs? This kid needs to be scooped up right now. This kid needs to be seen and heard by her people. This kid needs her parents to say to her, sweetheart, I know school can be really hard for you. And I want for you to know that no matter what you ever say, think, or do, I got you. You are my girl and I love you. And we're going to be okay. We're going to get through this. So you go crush your day. And whatever happens, when I come and get you at the end of the day, my mama heart, my daddy heart will be just as big as it was for you this morning. That's it.
That's a powerful answer. I think this question can apply to both parts, because you said there's part one is heal through yourself, because if you're constantly triggered, you're seeing them as a triggered version of you, you're not going to be able to be present and connect and be. What are some tools or strategies for the parent to heal? And then I know the second part might be a little bit harder because it could be a situational appendant, but what are some of the more common tools or strategies of what to be for the child? Like you said, pick them up, be present, hold them, breathe with them. Like I know breath work is something I'm very passionate about in my life, but I would assume that would be obviously relevant for the young ones as well. So what are some of the tools and strategies to heal? And then what are some of the maybe common go-tos of who you need to be for children?
Mm-hmm. And you mean initially, what are some of the tools and strategies to heal as parents, as big people, as grown-ups?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I really think that you can do that work in isolation, and it's going to be so much more powerful if you can work with a guide. And by a guide, it could be a healer, it could be a counselor, it could be a therapist, it could be a psychologist. And whoever it is, it'll need to be somebody who you would choose as a friend, and not because you need to be friends with them, but rather because you need to feel like you've got a little bit of reciprocity and that there's a connection there. You also would want to choose somebody as a guide who really gets the idea that the environment creates the mind, and then the mind creates the environment, and has an understanding of inner child kind of work. The challenge with being a grown-up, whether you're a parent or maybe you're in the world of business or whatever maybe you're an elite athlete, whatever it is, when you're triggered in a state of feeling kind of alarmed and undone, you often are on. Like you have to respond, something has to happen in that moment, and you feel the pressure to kind of perform. So we don't always have the opportunity to navel gaze when we're living in like the real time of life. And what I do for myself and what I invite my client parents to do is just to attend to the idea that that inner child in you is who is really fired up right now. And just like you're going to show up for the child out here, you also want to show up for the child in here. And you can't see on camera right now, but I have my other hand placed on my stomach because I'm a person that feels it in my chest and feels it in my tummy. When I'm triggered, that's where it goes. Some people it's in their head, some people it's in their hands, whatever it is. I physically go to that spot and I just put my hands on myself, and that's just my physical touch reminder. I will come to you. You matter and you're important, and I will tend to you. And then often I'm thrust into whatever meltdown is happening in front of me. And so we sort that out. The key is to go back to that moment. And so there's not a day that I wake up and or go to sleep where the first thing I do is to become in touch with, at one with my inner self in the morning, in those misty moments between sleeping and waking, you know, when you're just kind of coming out into the ethers of the day, that you find yourself and you spend a moment breathing into that, and you set some intentions for the day. And also, just as you would to your child on the outside of you, to the child on the inside of you, I got you. And even if you flip your lid and get a little loud and have a tricky kind of day, you're golden. And this is how we learn, and this is how we grow. And same thing at the end of the day. I also think that we can talk about these things a lot, and talk therapy is only going to get you so far. You have to go into other modalities that involve getting out of your head and into your heart and into your soul. For the longest path that we will ever travel is the one from the head to the heart. And if you happen to be, you know, an intelligent kind of human, you can intellectualize yourself right out of your healing. So to take your mind offline and go into the body, you spoke a little bit about breath work, and there's different kinds of healing approaches that will allow us to get into the subconscious mind and to create a new narrative and form new connections within the mind that will allow us to create a new story outside the mind. There's, you know, lots of really gorgeous books. Homecoming by Bradshaw is one of my favorites, that he maps out the significant connection between childhood traumas and adult wounding, and gives some really gorgeous ideas and tools for how to navigate that. And it's a lifelong process. Our job is to be defeated by ever greater challenges until the moment we take our last breath. And that's what it is to heal the inner child.
What a great answer. And I guess just to touch on that second point as well, what are like a lot of the common beings that we can be for our child? So when they're upset, they need us first. Get out of your trigger, get out of your wound. And then what are the common B's to be for the child? Is it to be present? Is it to hold them? Is it to, I don't know. I'd like to know.
You know, it's an interesting thing. Wayne Dyer once famously said, "We're not human doings, we're human beings." And if I had a nickel for every time a parent has said to me, "But what do I do?" I'd be like really, really wealthy. And I think the challenge is that we so connect being good parents to doing something a certain way. I'll never forget, this is years and years ago. I had a couple come in. They had a 3-year-old. He was really cute, which was a really good thing, because I'm not sure he would have survived his first 3 years had he not been that adorable. And at the time that I first met them, he was spending up to 2 hours at a go in isolation, in timeouts, which is a devastating experience for children. And so we had a big long chat, and I sort of shared with them what it is that children need. They need connection above and beyond anything else. So we're not going to do the timeouts, and here's all the reasons why. And instead, we're going to see it, feel it, be it, and we're going to respond with the things that he needs. And this dad was like 6'5". He had just come. He had his coveralls on because he was a car mechanic, and he was like greasy and and he walked in, and I was like, but you just gotta love him. And he like looked at me the whole time, and finally at the end of our session he said, okay, so if I've got this right, there's no discipline. And he wasn't wrong. So when you ask me what are some sort of key ways of how we be with our children, the first thing is to understand that we don't need to do any one thing. We don't need to, there's no 1, 2, 3 magic script. There's no, perfect set of tricks or strategies, because we're human beings. So we have to get into the heart and soul of it all. Having said that, I understand full well as a parent, when you are in like real time and life is happening all around you, sometimes you are helped by having a little life breathed into what it could possibly take shape as. So the first thing that I would say is that you respond with relationship. So rather than reacting to the behavior, you respond to the child, respond to their heart. So the kid is, I don't know, having a meltdown on the grocery aisle floor. And instead of saying, stop doing that, you're embarrassing me, which would be reacting to the behavior, or I told you we weren't going to, reacting to the behavior, you respond to the heart of the child, respond with relationship. You're having a really tricky go, love. I'm right here. I got you. We're going to take some breaths. Give it a moment. I don't want to breathe. I know you don't want to breathe. Sometimes breathing's really hard when you're really mad. I'm not mad. That's right. You're having a big feeling. So you're just there. I'm holding you. I'm there for relationship. I'm responding from that place. That's the first thing. The second thing would be when they go high, your job is to go low. So they go high, you go low. And that means if they're having a eruption, do not jump into that with them. That's where you hang on to yourself, because now imagine your kid's having a public meltdown and everybody's staring at you, and you can feel your face going red and the triggers are up and everything's happening. So you're going to take a breath. You're going to come back to that later. I got you and I got me. And then you're going to stay low. And my advice around that would be, don't be weird. And what I mean by that is, like, if you've ever, thought about classic therapist response, I'm feeling really mad. And then the therapist's like, what I think you're saying is you're feeling really mad. And you kind of just want to throat punch them because you don't feel like they're like getting it, right? And so you become passionate about being, you be passionate about being compassionate. So in staying low and being compassionate, you're still going to show up with big heart. You're just not going to jump into the crazy roundabout circle with the child. And then the final thing would be to drop a little flag. A flag drop is just a really gentle, very quick reminder that you have run into a boundary, my darling. This is a rule, or this is a boundary, or this is an expectation, and I'm just letting you know. And so if my son, when he was little, true story, walloped me in the face because he was really angry about something, and I'm going to respond with relationship. You're having a really tricky go. I'm going to stay low. So he's gone high. I'm staying low, and I'm right here for you. So I'm not jumping into his struggle with him. And then I'm going to say, we use our gentle hands. Now I'm not deluding myself into believing that he then is going to be like, oh, right, mom, I forgot. I'm just going to use my gentle hands right now. He's lid flipped at the moment. So he's not thinking, but I've let him know the boundary is there. And that's going to be important later on when I debrief that situation with him and circle back around and say, hey, buddy, remember what happened earlier? Always remember it's gentle hands. And then we're out. It's not a lecture. It's like 5 words or less. That was 2, gentle hands, in, out, and right back into relationship-based care. And then we sit with them until it calms. And when everybody's calm, which might be, 5 seconds, 5 minutes, 5 hours, or in the case of husbands and wives, sometimes 5 days later, you're going to circle back around and you're going to debrief it. and you're just going to let them know, this is how it's going to go next time, and can I count on you? That's it.
How do you like? How do you get to that point? Like I was just picturing it. I'm just like friends of mine that are parents and parents that I've seen. I'm just like, it's like a movie what you just described. How you recommend it? Is there like, obviously it's a journey, right? And as you heal yourself, you'll get better and stronger, just like a muscle. Is there any practices, whether it's meditation or journaling or anything like that, that can help the parents get to that level? Because that requires a level of patience, a level of self-awareness, a level of presence for the parents, and not like I'm just picturing that shopping center, shopping mall example where you got people looking at you, they're not listening to you. You got like, it's all. How do you get to that point where they do anything and you just stay poised? Is there any like
Yeah.
modalities or things that would help a parent start to get to that point?
So before I answer that, I want to just highlight for your listeners that they should not be deceived into believing that at every moment of every day in my children's lives, I have shown up as this very centered, very grounded, very compassionate mother, because that would not be true. Almost on the daily, I have dropped the ball on what it is that I have been speaking to you about and messed it up myself. And so you don't actually, just for everybody to take a load off, you don't need to be perfect in this. You just need to be good enough. And that's such a key thing, that there's actually a phrase in the developmental literature called the good enough parent. It doesn't require perfection. It just requires good enough. Nature would not have been fool enough to create our young so fragile that if we have, one parental meltdown, we break them. On the other hand, if that becomes a pattern, then that's going to be an issue. Now, you are right. It does require a mature adult, not a child who is living in an adult's body, but an actual grown adult, to respond in the way that I have just laid out for you with the child. Anything you can be doing to invite yourself back to your center and to invite yourself to sit in neutrality so that you're not feeling so triggered by what it is that's happening around you is going to be a benefit to you as a parent. Doing your own work is definitely a piece of that. So you could meditate till the cows came home. And if you aren't doing your own work, that's not going to help you stay in that moment. Mindfulness as an approach, I often talk about our third eyeball that hangs up here and sort of just watches us. And sometimes I'll feel it even in myself where I'm like, oh, check you out, girlfriend, you're doing it. Yeah, you just did it. You just dropped the F-bomb in front of your children. That just happened. We're going to need to check in on that later, where you can just be an observer of your life rather than simply the actor in your life. And that you are taking the opportunity to be really gracious with yourself when you mess it up. Because the more you have the, oh, why did you do that? Why are you responding like this again? The more you're going to be triggered and the more you're going to be frustrated. So to keep coming back to grace and compassion for self, just as you offer it to your children.
I'll just run down that question. I've got 3 more to hopefully squeeze in before we finish up. I guess I'll start with this one. How do you discipline correctly? I know you've got a book. I'm yet to read it. I believe it's Discipline Without Damage. Can you just give us the summarized version of that? I think you mentioned something about like timeouts or something as you were talking before. So what are the rights and wrongs around discipline? Because I know that's I've got memories of my grandmother, and she would like literally have to sit in the corner of my head in the corner for like 30 minutes when I did something wrong. My dad and mum had the wooden spoon. Like everyone's got this just different modalities. So I'd love to know, I guess, the rights and wrongs.
The wooden spoon modality. Yeah, I'll answer the question by talking a little bit about the sort of behind the scenes of discipline, and then it'll walk us right into what shape does it take. So in the book that you mentioned, Discipline Without Damage, I talk about the discipline vortex. And essentially it is this. We as human beings, especially when our minds are forming when we are young, we desperately need connection. So much so that a human infant who does not receive connection of some kind can be watered, fed, clothed, and housed, and they will die. That's how essential connection is to life. It is as essential as air to the human being. So when our children face disconnection, it freaks them out, right? It dysregulates them. And Freud said, that which stays in festers and comes forth later in uglier ways, better out than in. And so when a child gets worked up like that, their job is to communicate that they are not okay. So they will act out. Okay? Now the child acts out, and if you're following along the ABCs, and we're good parents, we're going to obviously immediately consequence them. We're going to put them in a timeout, we're going to take something away from them, we're going to remove a privilege, or we're going to promise them that if they change their behavior, they're going to get a star in the reward chart. And the opposite of getting a star is not getting a star. And so sticker charts are also just consequences in disguise. So the child is now acted out. And because we've been taught how to be good parents, we respond in this behaviorist way, focusing on the consequence. And all of those things have within them an experience of disconnection. I put my child in a timeout. I'm literally physically and emotionally disconnected from them. I take something away from my child. And you might say, oh, well, how does that involve disconnection? Well, I'll tell you what. I have a cup of coffee every single morning. And that's just a ritual and a routine, and it makes my world go round. And maybe I'm dependent on it, but it's just how I do life. And if my husband were to get, cranky at me about something because I was being cranky at him about something, and he were to say to me, well, that's enough. No coffee for you tomorrow. I'd be like, wait, what? Like, I'm not feeling connected to him. I don't think that we're in right relationship. And so whether it's a timeout, a consequence, a removal of a privilege, or the use of some kind of reward system, those things all involve disconnect. Where did we start with this? The disconnect dysregulates the child, and then the child must act out. So the child has behaved however they've behaved. We respond with disconnect. We freak them out. They must act out. And then we're like, ha, more discipline. So we respond with more disconnection, more dysregulation in the child, more acting out in the child, more disconnection from the parents to try and control the behavior. And you can see that we just get sucked down into this dark hole that is the discipline vortex. The way out of that is to completely abandon anything and everything that involves an experience of disconnection for the child. So in the book, Discipline Without Damage, I actually outline 9 stepping stones to disciplining without damage. All of those things have connection at their core. I already shared some of them with you. To respond with relationship, when they go high, you go low, you're going to drop a flag. You also want to make sure that you don't talk too much. Because when you talk too much, you dethrone yourselves in terms of being the leaders of your children. And so, if I was going to need to change an appointment with someone, I don't say, oh, I need to change this appointment because because I actually don't care what your impression is or opinion is of why I'm changing the appointment. I'm just changing the appointment, and I'm just telling you straight like it is. And if it's my child and I say to them, no, you can't have a cookie, and then they say, why? And I keep talking, I say, oh, it'll spoil your appetite. What's the very next thing they're going to say? I promise it won't. I promise I'll eat my dinner. Have they accepted your no? No. Why? Because you're still talking. So less is more. Stop talking. You exit gracefully. So you know how you can feel it coming up in you where you're like, oh yeah, I'm not okay. And I'm actually going to go off on my kid in just a hot second here if this situation doesn't get turned around. And so before you flip your lid, which is the expression that we use to say your cortical thinking mind has gone offline and you've gone limbic, before you go limbic, get yourself out of there, but get yourself out of there with grace. So exit gracefully, stage left. How do you do that? Mommy needs to go pee. I'll be right back. I forgot I was supposed to call grandma 5 minutes ago. Hang on, kiddo, I'll be right back. And you just buy yourself some space and buy yourself some time. You also want to make sure that you are creating enough gray zone for life to happen. What do I mean by that? Well, my youngest son, school was like a challenging place for him to be. And so if I wanted to be very heart-centered in how I was responding to him, I had to be sniffing him. And I had to be adjusting my parenting approach based on where he was at, which was very different on a Monday morning, going back to school after the weekend, to a Wednesday afternoon, to a Friday morning. So I had to constantly be shifting and moving and adjusting my parameters in order to suit the needs of my child. And then the final thing is to really circle back to relationship. Like, if your listeners take nothing away from this conversation, except for this one thing, come back to relationship. Do nothing, say nothing, be nothing that gets in the way of, interrupts, or possibly makes vulnerable the relationship that you have with your child. And you won't set a foot wrong.
That's amazing. Everyone, please listen back to that absolute gold you just gave. That was amazing. The last two that I'm going to give, you actually mentioned a point that might tie into it. School is a good example of this. Is I believe we grow with both support and challenge. We need both. Too much challenge, we break. Too much support, we don't develop any grit or we don't fall over to scrape our knee. So how do you enforce both in a healthy way? So like the kid goes to school, but they don't want to, and they're flipping their lid. And then how do you then, when you go through the evolution of the journey with your child, there's going to be times where they need more support, need more challenge. I guess, do you have any, thoughts or ideas on how parents can do that in a healthy way where they don't over support their child and they're bubble wrapped and they're not growing, versus they're challenging them too much and they're breaking and they don't have that safe space for them to regulate and come back to neutral? So yeah, just any thoughts or input on how to both support and challenge your child to grow.
Yeah, so if you can think about like we're going to do some nested circles, and the center circle is where I am living in comfort. I feel safe here, I feel comfortable here, and this is when I'm like very regulated, I'm very settled, and everything's hunky-dory. Right outside that is our stretch zone. So we're stretching for something. We're starting a new school tomorrow and it's a stretch. We're trying out for the basketball team and we're nervous about that. We've got an exam. We're gonna go make some new friends. We're, whatever it is, it's a stretch. And then outside the stretch zone is the panic zone. So our job as parents is to make sure, if at all possible, that we don't put our children into the panic zone. We want them to live most of their life in that comfort zone and to have little forays out into the stretch zone. Now, how do you know if the stretch zone has become too present and your child's spending too much time in the stretch zone and or has actually even been pushed out into the panic zone? You will know because your child will tell you. How will your child tell you? With their behavior. For younger children, the behaviors tend to go into the body. So you'll see meltdowns, but you'll also see disruptions in terms of sleep, eating, peeing, and pooping. For older children, it's going to come out in behavior. They're either going to act out and be upset with the world out there, or they're going to act in and be upset with the world in here, which is where we see self-harm and those kinds of things. They will tell you if it's too much. And when you can sense that it's too much, you step in fiercely and adjust it. That's when you're giving your kid a mental health day. That's when you are swooping in with generosity and packing the school bag for them and just making the morning a little bit easier so they don't have so much to take on themselves. And you're really working to adjust it until you can feel the child settling. Now, how do you know as a parent that you're not going too soft and you're, keeping them in the safe zone because you don't want your child to struggle? Pay attention to the intention. One more time, pay attention to the intention. If your intention in that as a parent, in terms of preventing your child from taking something on, is born of fear for your child and or fear for yourself, and that's usually what it is, fear for ourselves, where we're like, we feel uncomfortable about that makes us nervous, we don't like how that is, we don't want them to fail because we remember failing and it was so yucky and whatever it is, then that's That's the wrong approach. That's has you turned into a helicopter parent that is going to kibosh your child's ability to become adaptive and resilient. It's okay for our children to struggle. We don't want them in struggle all the time, but life is full of struggle. The key is that when your child is facing struggle, they've got a soft landing and they know that. And then they can dust off and stand up and invite their courage to return and head out and take it on again.
I love the visual of the zones. I just drew it out as you wrote it down: the safe, stretch, and panic. And just to sort of confirm that is just be attentive and use your intuition and just sort of gauge if they're spending too much time stretch, if they're panicking, if they're too safe. Look into your intention. I really like that because I do relate to that a lot, where the intention of what you're doing is actually resulting in the behavior that you're doing to your children. So I found that fascinating. Last question to wrap this one up. This is one I've been asking myself. I've been talking to my friends about this as well, just as young 25-year-olds without kids, is how do you parent your kids in a way to enforce, in quotations, healthy habits without putting it on them, which makes them then not want to do it? How the hell do you do that in a healthy way? Like, let's use just eating healthy food as an example. Because like for me, I grew up and my one of my parents would force vegetables down my throat, and I hated it, and I wouldn't. In result, I didn't eat them. But like now in hindsight, I'm like, I wish I did, because obviously that's good for your health and it's good to eat those types of foods. But it's like generally you find the more you push, the more they pull back. So how do you, yes, allow them to make mistakes, fall over, learn lessons of life, but then also create those healthier long-term habits without forcing it onto them? I really don't know how to answer that.
So as a basic principle, when connection is high, resistance will be low. It's like a teeter-totter. When connection is low, resistance will be high. And that means that when it comes down to getting our children to do anything, and I'm going to reformulate that, because I'm a real have a real commitment to language. When it comes to wanting to be truly in the lead of our children's healthy growth and development, our power to show up as that person comes from connection. So when connection is high, it's not that they're always going to be thrilled about what it is that you're asking of them, and they will desire to do your bidding. My boys are 15 and 18. My eldest has just gone off to uni. And at 15 and 18, I mean, they're spreading their wings. They're out in the world. They're experimenting with things. They're trying life on for size. I never have to threaten them. I tell them what the rules are, and they follow the rules because they want to be good for me. The relationship is in place, and I don't have to flex, any kind of threat over them to have them fall into line. So the number one thing would be to really go back to what is at the heart of all of this, which is to be relationship based in the way that you approach it. The second thing is to create ritual within your home. And what I mean by ritual is, we as human beings have this big, we really want to belong, and we want to feel like we are part of something. And so in our home, this is the way that we do it. When we have dinner, we serve it family style. And there's always a healthy variety of things that everybody can choose from. And you get to have voice in that. And we get to try everything that's on the table. You don't have to eat heaps of it. You don't have to, have like a whole cup of broccoli or whatever it is that's so repellent to you. And you just give it a go. And that's how we do it in our family. In our family, when my boys got their cell phones, there were rules around that. We don't take our cell phones into our bedrooms. That's just not what we do. We don't say hello to our phones before we say hello to our actual people. And so we do hellos as a family in the morning before we get on our electronics. And that's just how we go. It's just how we do life. And so there's a ritual in that. And then they don't even question it. It's like it's Wednesday. We just don't have phones in our room. This is just what we do. And so when you can start as you wish to go and have relationship at the center of that, your kids just follow along. And yeah, there'll be some pushback and whatever, and welcome to life. The joy of life is in the ups and the downs and the the music that comes from that kind of journey. I think you're muted.
My
There you go.
apologies. My apologies. Incredible answer. It's I just find it so fascinating, parenting and the topic of it, because I find it's probably obviously why it is you do what you do and your gift to give to the world. It's we just don't get shown, and we adopt these beliefs and these behaviors from our parents and their parents and society and social media and movies, to be honest. So
Yeah.
it's amazing that you're giving your gift and you're educating and you're not just impacting our generation, it's the generations to flow onto, which is really, really awesome. Dr. Vanessa, if anyone wanted to connect with you or to find you, your services, your books, your content, where's the best place someone can connect with you?
Yeah, so drvanessalapointe.com is my website, and literally everything is available through that portal. And I'm also quite active on social, on Instagram and on Facebook, and it's just Dr. V. Lapointe and or Dr. Vanessa Lapointe.
Amazing. If there was one message you could leave for the world, what would it be?
Stop working so hard to try and crack the code for what to do, and settle into the essence of what it is to be, because the doing will flow from the being.
That was beautiful. Thank you so much. Listeners, everyone, thank you for getting all the way to the end. Please share this with a friend. Please go check out Dr. Vanessa's content. It was fantastic. And Vanessa, one more time, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you.